Okay, I thought I would talk about today some, because we have a lot of newer investors. So I thought we would look at some red flags when you're walking through a home. If you don't know anything about construction, these are some really big items that you need to look out for that can cost you a lot of money. And so if you see any of these things, you want to make sure before you make an offer on the property or get it under contract, you want to make sure a contractor looks at it, gives you prices, you do your full due diligence on this. So these are, I'm going to start with foundation issues because it's San Antonio. I mean, we have foundation issues all over town. It's really, really common. A lot of investors, that's kind of our wheelhouse, right? Because normal buyers are terrified of foundation issues. And so it's usually good for investors. But if you're starting out or you're using, especially if you're using conventional financing, you're going to have to stay away from foundation issues. So if you see on the exterior, you see cracks in the brick or the rock, and there's a difference between like a masonry crack that's just the mud is broken. There's a difference between really fine cracks and like major, you can see this is substantial separation. And so, you don't want to run away from any house that has any crack at all because you'll never be able to buy a house. But if you are looking at it and going like, wow, this is pretty bad, that's probably a foundation issue. The same thing here with the chimney separation. So if you look at, and if it looks like the chimney's kind of pulling away from the rest of the house, that can be a pretty big sign of foundation issues. And the same thing with the cracks near windows and doors. So these are different materials that are coming together. And so that's the first place that it's going to pull apart if you have foundation issues. And so really, look at windows and doors and see what's going on. Again, a crack on the window or door could be just a problem with that window, or it could just be, the caulking got brittle and fell off. But, it could be serious as well. So if you see something like any of these things, you definitely want to get a foundation inspection done. Are there any questions about that? Or Nick, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I might add is if you're not familiar and you're looking at, when you're walking through the house and you start looking at the sheetrock, there's some different cracks in there, and sometimes they'll tell you different things. I talk to people a lot where you can see where the two pieces of sheetrock like go together at the seam, and you see a little crack in there. It's usually it's not a big deal. The house moved, but it didn't move very much to cause that. When you see the big breaks in the sheetrock where it actually broke the piece of sheetrock, right? It's not where two of them touch. That's usually a sign of some more movement. And again, it all depends on your comfort level. As you do more projects and become more and more comfortable with foundation issues, you can then use it to your advantage to buy things at a less price, because like what Cassie was saying earlier, you can really reduce the competition because a lot of people just won't buy them. And as long as you factor in enough in your rehab, you can fix them, especially in San Antonio, and be just fine.
Yeah, that's what here on this slide, the bottom right-hand corner, these are the cracks. And so, like I said before, if you try to buy a house that has no cracks, you're just never going to buy a house. All houses have some kind of cracks in the drywall or exterior or something. And so telling the difference between, okay, this is a major crack, this means foundation, versus, oh, this is just the mud dried up, it's pretty hard to tell if you're a novice. But these are some ways. So like on this bottom right hand corner, this is the joint between two walls, and so you can see, this is just, they're pulling apart. The ceiling here and the wall are physically separating, and that crack was pretty big. It was about as big as my pinky nail. You can't really tell from the picture, but if you've got one that's pretty wide, that's a big sign. So this up on the right hand corner with the level, this is actually a picture of hardwood buckling, but I couldn't find an easy picture of the bumps that you can see in some, especially pier and beam houses. I mean, just as you're walking around, if the floor is sloping, or if there are bumps. So even if you have to kind of get on the floor and try to look and see, are there any sort of gentle hills or dips in the floor? Those are signs of foundation issues. And what I always do when I'm doing a showing, even just regular clients, I always take a ball to showings and I'll just drop it on the ground and see if it rolls. So that's a pretty good way. If you think the floor is sloping, well, take a ball and you'll find out pretty quickly. So that's just a trick an inspector taught me a long time ago. And then these two pictures over here under the title, these are actual houses that I showed. These houses have already been flipped, if you can believe it. Somebody flipped it and did this and just called it a day, said that's fine, it's okay for the wall to be crooked like that. But if you see the trim on a door, or the tops of the doors should be parallel to the ceiling, this edge of the cabinet should be parallel with the wall. If you see weird stuff like that, now on these older homes there's going to be some of that, just because if they're 100 years old, yeah, of course there's going to be a little bit of that, but generally, if it's this bad, there's something wrong with the foundation. So just red flags on that. Roofing is another big one to look for. And I like foundation and roofing because a lot of that you could see from the outside. So, if you are not wanting to go in and look at a bunch of houses, but you want to drive by, you can kind of see, or if you're Nick and you're trying to find, a seller to do a wholesale deal, if you see this kind of stuff, that might be somebody who's in distress. So the roof up here on the top left-hand corner, this is missing shingles. So that's pretty easy to see from the ground. If it's minor, if there's only a couple, it could just be, it was a windstorm or something. It's not that big a deal. And just those patches need to be done. But if it's older and you see a whole bunch, that's definitely a red flag. On this one with the blue siding here, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see a little dip here, kind of a little valley. So something's going on there. The structure is, not proper under that. And what's bad about this is it'll hold water, and it'll hold water up against this siding, which will rot the siding away, and then it's going to be inside the house before long. So if you see any dips, that could be a problem. Obviously on the inside, if you see the water stains, when you're walking a house, definitely look up, always look up, look for water stains. Something like this could be the roof. It could also be like if there's an AC unit in the attic, could be an AC unit leak. If it's a 2-story house, it could be a plumbing leak, but you need to figure out what that is before you make an offer. And then you see that just another structural issue here. And then finally, looking at the siding where it connects with the roof, because a lot of times on these older homes that haven't been maintained, it's rotting out. And it's really, really common, especially around the chimney, for there to be holes in this that let a lot of water in. So, and that can be doing damage for years before anybody really realizes it. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And then finally, some other things. Obviously, if it's got a super old water heater, you just want to count on replacing that. I pretty much run numbers with, if a water heater is older than 6 or 7 years old, I just run numbers with replacing it, because it's probably going to be happening pretty soon. Same thing with HVAC. Although with air conditioners, if it looks like it's in pretty good shape, a lot of those old units really can keep going for a long time. You might not want it on your house because it's higher energy cost, but on a rental house, it's fine. It'll do the job, especially if it's a smaller house. But if it looks like this one, obviously you want to just replace that right away. This up here is rat droppings. So you want to make sure you don't have a rodent infestation, or if you do, that you know about it. You don't want to be working and then have rodents coming and undoing your work. You also, if you see rat droppings or any kind of rodent, markings, you want to have the inspector take a look at the electrical wires because they can chew those out. You also want to look at the HVAC duct work because they can eat holes in that. So a couple of things that can really be costly up in the attic from rodents. I put a 220-volt outlet on here. On some of these older homes, the electrical, just wasn't built for what we use today. A lot of them don't have a dryer. They don't have a lot of the major appliances that homeowners today expect. And that's something that's pretty expensive to upgrade. So, it's not saying don't buy a house if the electricals, needs upgrading. Of course, that's just another item on your to-do list, but just make sure that, because electrical can get expensive really fast. And then I put a drain here. Make sure, if a home has had foundation issues in the past, there is a possibility that the drain pipes under the home are broken, and that can be, digging those out and ripping through the concrete can be really, really expensive. So there are plumbing companies that will come and do a test, and it's like, I don't know, 50, 80 bucks, and they'll just make sure that there aren't any problems in the foundation. And that's a pretty good idea.